Your brother needed it more, Dad said coldly when I saw my empty college fund had been given away. I walked out without a word. 3 years later they asked me for help. I still remember the way my father said it. Cold. Final. Like he was doing nothing more than stating an obvious fact. Your brother needed it more. That was all he said when I saw my empty college fund statement. Years of savings gone handed over to my younger brother, Nathan, without a second thought. I had always known I wasn't the favorite. Nathan was the golden child. The one they doted on. The one they excused no matter how many times he messed up. But this was different. This was theft. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I didn't even ask them why. I just stood there, gripping that useless piece of paper, feeling my whole future collapse in front of me. And then, without another word, I turned around, packed my bags, and walked out the door. They didn't chase after me. They didn't call. For 3 years, I clogged my way up from nothing. No degree. No support. Just a bitter, unrelenting drive to prove that I didn't need them. I worked brutal hours, learned everything I could, and built something of my own. My own business, my own future, a life where I owed them nothing. And then, just when I thought I had left them behind for good, they came crawling back. 3 years, that's how long it took for me to build something out of the nothing they left me with. I worked like a man possessed. I took the worst shifts, the longest hours. I studied when I wasn't working. I networked, I took risks, I learned to survive on sheer will alone. And eventually, I didn't just survive, I thrived. I built a business from the ground up. It wasn't glamorous at first, but I learned how to make it work. And then, one day, it wasn't just working anymore. It was growing. I had employees, clients, money, stability. Everything they took from me, I built back with my own hands. And then one evening, as I was closing up my office, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I almost ignored it. But something, call it curiosity, call it instinct, made me pick up. Hey, it's Mom. I stared at the phone for a moment, the sound of her voice unfamiliar after all these years. We need your help, she said, her voice trembling. It's bad. I should have hung up. I should have laughed, and blocked her number. But instead I leaned back in my chair and said, go on. She hesitated, like she couldn't quite believe I wasn't yelling at her yet. It's your father, he lost his job. We're behind on everything. The house, the bills, we don't have anything left. I let that sit for a moment. And Nathan? Silence. Then, a shaky breath. He lost it all. That got my attention. All of what? The money, she whispered. Everything we gave him. He invested it. Some opportunity. It was supposed to be a sure thing. But I laughed. I couldn't help it. Let me get this straight, I said. You stole my college fund, gave it to Nathan, and he blew every last cent. We didn't steal it, she shot back, suddenly defensive. He had more potential than you, okay? He had dreams. He needed the money too. I cut her off. I needed that money too, Mom. But you never cared about that, did you? Silence. I could hear her breathing. Could almost picture her twisting the phone cord in her fingers like she used to do when she was nervous. Please, she said finally, her voice cracking. We have nowhere else to turn. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my desk. Well, Mom, I said slowly, that sounds like a you problem. And then, before she could respond, I hung up. I wasn't done with him yet, not by a long shot, but I wasn't going to make this easy. Not after what they did to me. I knew they would call again. When you spend your whole life being someone's safety net, they always assume you'll be there to catch them. Even when they cut you loose, even when they let you fall, they still expect you to come running when they need help. But I wasn't their safety net anymore. Still, I was curious. So I let them stew for a week. No calls, no texts, nothing. I could imagine their panic growing, the way my father would pace the living room, snapping at my mother while she wrung her hands. The way Nathan, their golden child, would sulk in his old bedroom, waiting for someone else to fix his mess. And then, right on schedule, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was my father. I let it ring. Then I let it ring again. The third time, I picked up. Dad, his voice was tense, controlled. I could hear the exhaustion behind it. Son, we need to talk. You mean like how we talked when you emptied my college fund? I asked, leaning back in my chair. A long silence. I know you're still upset about that. I laughed. Actually laughed. Upset? No, Dad. Upset was 3 years ago. Now? Now I'm just wondering how long it'll take before you start begging. His tone sharpened. We're not begging. Not yet, I mused. Another pause, then more controlled. We just need a little help. Alone? Just to get back on our feet. Alone? I repeated amused. Sure, with interest and collateral. This isn't funny, he snapped. Oh, I think it is, I said. Because if I remember correctly, when I needed money for college, you told me Nathan needed it more. So, doesn't he need it more now? My father sighed. I could picture him rubbing his temple, jaw clenched in frustration. Nathan is trying, okay? He had a setback, but he had a fortune, Dad, and he lost it. That's not a setback. That's a failure. Silence. Please, son. My mother's voice came through now softer, more pleading. If not for us, then at least for the house. It's the family home. You grew up here. That house stopped being my home the moment you stole from me. Her breath hitched. I wasn't being dramatic. That was the truth. For years they made me believe I was worth less than Nathan. That my future was disposable. That my hard work, My effort, none of it mattered as much as their golden child's dreams. And now, those dreams had turned to dust. I'll think about it, I said finally. I heard my father exhale, relieved. Good, good. We'll, but only if Nathan asked me himself. Silence. Then my father scoffed. That's ridiculous. He's been through a lot. So have I said flatly, and yet no one gave me a dime. More silence. Fine, he muttered. I'll talk to him. No need, I said, glancing at my watch. You have an hour. If he doesn't call by then, don't bother calling again. Then I hung up. I wasn't playing their game. I was making them play mine. 58 minutes later my phone rang. Nathan. I let it ring twice before answering. Well, I said smirking. Did Daddy make you call? Silence. Then a heavy sigh. Look, man. I know you're mad. Mad? I repeated. No, Nathan. Mad was 3 years ago. Now, I'm just entertained. He exhaled sharply, frustrated. Fine, whatever. Can you just help us or not? Help you? I laughed. Why? Because you needed it more? Come on, he muttered. It wasn't my fault. I was trying to invest, and you failed. I cut in, just like you failed at school. Just like you failed at every job Dad got you. Just like you failed at life. His breathing turned ragged. You don't have to be a jerk about it. Oh, but I do, I said. Because 3 years ago, no one cared what I needed. No one cared how I felt. And now, you get to feel what that's like. Nathan was silent. For the first time in his life, he had no excuse. No defense. Good luck, little brother, I said. And then I hung up. I never planned on picking up their calls again. I expected them to call again. Desperation has a way of making people persistent. But instead, the next knock on my door came in person. When I opened it, there stood my mother. She looked older, more tired, more fragile than I remembered. She tried to smile, but it barely reached her eyes. I just wanted to see you, she said softly. I leaned against the doorframe. No, you wanted to convince me, she sighed. Can we at least sit down? I let her in, not because I wanted to, but because I wanted to see how far they were willing to sink. She perched on the edge of my couch, hands twisting in her lap. Your father, he's not well. The stress, the pressure, it's been too much. I didn't say anything. And Nathan, you don't understand. He's always struggled. He never had your strength. We tried to give him a chance. A chance? I scoffed. You stole my future and handed it to him. And he wasted it. Her eyes glistened. We made mistakes, I know, but we're still your family. Family? I repeated. When I walked out that night, did you chase after me? When I had nothing, did you call? Did you care? Her lip trembled. We thought you'd be fine. You were always the strong one. And look how that turned out, I said coldly. She swallowed hard. We're going to lose the house. I shrugged. Then lose it. We have nowhere else to go, she whispered. For a second, I almost felt something pity maybe. But then I remembered all the nights I lay awake, wondering how I would survive, how they had turned their backs without a second thought. So I stood. That's not my problem. She looked up pleading. Please, son. No, I said, walking to the door. You made your choice. Now live with it. I held the door open. She stood slowly shaking, as if she wanted to say more, but she didn't. Instead, she stepped outside, and as I closed the door behind her, I felt nothing. Not guilt, not regret, just peace. 2 days passed before my father called again. This time, he didn't sound angry. He didn't sound cold. He sounded small. Son, he said, voice rough. Please, that one word. Please. The man who once dismissed my future like it was nothing. The man who told me my dreams didn't matter because Nathan needed it more. Now, he was pleading. We don't have anywhere else to go. He admitted. The bank is taking the house. Your mother is falling apart. And Nathan, he has nothing. I let his words hang in the air. Funny, I said. That sounds a lot like where I was 3 years ago. Except no one came to save me. I know, he rasped. I know we were wrong. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. So why are you calling me? A pause. Then quietly. Because you're the only one left. There it was. The truth. Nathan, their golden child, had nothing to offer them now. And suddenly, I mattered again. I almost laughed. That's not my problem. Son, I already told Mom. I'll tell you the same thing. I exhaled. You made your choice. Now live with it. And then, without another word, I hung up. For the first time in my life, I was truly free. I thought that would be the end of it. That after I shut the door, both literally and figuratively, they'd finally understand. That they'd accept the consequences of their choices and disappear from my life. But I underestimated just how desperate people can become when they have nothing left. It was late one evening when I heard the knock. I almost didn't answer. I already knew who it was. But something in me, the part that wanted to see just how far they had fallen, made me open the door. And there they were. My father, looking thinner, older, like the weight of his own failure had finally settled on his shoulders. My mother, her eyes red and swollen, her hands clasped tightly in front of her as if in prayer. And Nathan. Nathan couldn't even look at me. For the first time in his life, he had nothing to say. No excuses, no arrogance, no entitled demands. He stood behind them, his face hollow, his hands stuffed deep into the pockets of a jacket that was 2 sizes too big for him. They were a picture of complete and utter defeat. We're not here to argue, my father said, his voice low. We're not here to make excuses. My mother nodded quickly. We have nowhere else to go. I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. And my father swallowed hard. And we need your help. The words hung heavy in the air. I looked at each of them, letting the silence stretch. 3 years? I finally said. 3 years, I scraped and clawed my way out of the hole you threw me into. Not once did you call. Not once did you check if I was even alive. My mother flinched. But now, I let out a slow breath. Now that everything's crumbling, you come to me? Nathan finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. I tilted my head. What was that? He swallowed hard. I messed up. I lost everything. And I know I don't deserve anything from you. But, I'm sorry. I studied him. He didn't look like the Nathan I remembered. The brother who had walked through life untouched by consequences. The one who had always needed it more. This was a man who had lost everything. And for a brief second, I almost felt bad for him. But then I remembered the years I spent alone. The nights I worked until my hands ached. The moments I thought I'd never make it out. And that brief second of pity vanished. No, I said simply. My mother gasped. No, no, I repeated, stepping back inside. You needed me, just like I needed you back then. And just like you did, I'm walking away. I started to close the door, but my father caught it, his eyes desperate. Please, he said again, his voice breaking. We'll do anything. Just help us. I met his gaze. Live with your choices, Dad. And then, for the last time, I shut the door in their faces. I didn't look back. I never would. I didn't hear from them after that. At first, I expected another wave of calls, another desperate plea for help. Maybe a guilt-tripping message from my mother, or a bitter voicemail from my father, accusing me of being heartless. But the silence stretched on, and I knew why. They had finally understood. There would be no forgiveness, no second chances, no last-minute rescue. I had walked away, and I wasn't coming back. For the first time in my life, I was truly free. I spent the next few weeks focusing on my business, my life. Without the weight of them dragging behind me, I felt lighter than I had in years. Then, one afternoon, I got a message from an old neighbor back home. Your parents moved out. That was all it said. I stared at my phone for a long time, feeling nothing. No anger, no joy, just a quiet sense of finality. They lost the house, the home they had chosen to sacrifice me for, and now they were gone. Nathan too. I had no idea where they went, and honestly, I didn't care. Weeks passed, then months. Life moved forward, just as it always had. I focused on my business, my future, and for the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. But every now and then, I'd think about them, not in the way they probably hoped. I didn't wonder where they were or if they were okay. I didn't feel guilt or regret. No. When I thought about them, it was only to remind myself of the lesson I had learned. Some people don't deserve your loyalty. And then, one evening I got a call, an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. Hello? There was silence at first. Then, a voice I hadn't heard in months. It's Nathan. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. What do you want? He hesitated. I wanted to say thank you. I blinked. For what? For not helping, he admitted. For making me figure things out on my own. That caught me off guard. What happened? I asked, though I wasn't sure I really cared. After you shut the door on us, Mom and Dad tried everything. Begging, borrowing, even scamming. Nothing worked. They burned every bridge, and eventually, I had no choice but to stop depending on them. I leaned back in my chair, listening. I got a job, he continued. A real one. It's not glamorous, but it's mine. And for the first time in my life, I know what it's like to work for something. To earn it. I didn't say anything. I used to hate you, he admitted, for walking away, for not giving me another chance. But now I get it. You weren't punishing me. You were teaching me something that no one else ever did. I sighed, rubbing my temple. So why are you calling, Nathan? To say I am sorry? And to say, I don't blame you for anything. That was something I never expected to hear. And Mom and Dad? I asked. Nathan hesitated. Still bitter. Still blaming everyone but themselves. But that's not my problem anymore. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. So, that's it then? I asked. That's it, he said. I won't bother you again. For the first time in years, I heard sincerity in his voice. Take care of yourself, Nathan, I said quietly. You too, man. And with that, the call ended. I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone. Not sad. Not angry. Just at peace. For the first time in my life, Nathan wasn't my problem. And neither were my parents. They were nothing more than a chapter one had finally closed. That phone call with Nathan was the last time I ever heard from any of them. My parents never reached out again. No more guilt-tripping messages. No more desperate calls. It was as if they had finally accepted that I was no longer their safety net. And honestly, that was exactly how I wanted it. I had spent years believing that family was something unbreakable. That no matter how badly they treated me, no matter how much they took, I was supposed to keep giving. Keep forgiving. But that wasn't family. Family wasn't about obligation. It wasn't about sacrifice at the expense of yourself. It was about respect. And once I realized they never respected me, it became easy to walk away. Life kept moving. And so did I. My business continued to grow. And for the first time, I could actually enjoy the life I'd built. No more looking over my shoulder. No more wondering when they would try to use me again. I was free. One evening, as I sat in my apartment overlooking the city, I thought back to that moment 3 years ago, the night I walked out without a word. The anger, the betrayal, the bitterness, all of it was gone now. Not because I forgave them, but because they simply didn't matter anymore. I had one, and they had to live with their choices just like I had. And that was enough for me.